This is Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. Electric vehicles, EVs, don't emit pollutants into the air. That's obviously a good thing if you're focused on cutting emissions and curbing climate change. But they're also often more expensive than gas cars, and the country's charging infrastructure along roads and highways isn't fully built out yet. So how do you get people to buy EVs? In Vermont, one strategy was a new law that was passed in 2022. It aimed to end gas-powered car sales by 2035. To do that, manufacturers had to increase the percentage of EVs for sale in Vermont. State agencies said the strategy has led to a pretty quick increase in EV ownership in Vermont. But then, about 3 weeks ago, Vermont's Governor Phil Scott issued an executive order. It halted enforcement of this law for a year and a half. In the order, he said his administration, quote, remains committed to achieving emissions reductions, including vehicle emissions. We're going to explore that decision this hour and learn about the mandate's history and its effects on car sellers, buyers, and truckers. We'll have a number of different guests weighing in. And we hope you call in too with your thoughts or your questions about the EV car and truck supply mandates. Our number is 800-639-2211. And some of you have already emailed us already as well. You can do that at vermontedition@vermontpublic.org. Now, first, to give us an overview of the program and how it compares to what's going on in other states is Nathaniel Eisen. He's a freelance journalist who recently wrote a piece for Inside Climate News about what's going on in Vermont, and he is based right here in Colchester. Nathaniel, welcome.
Thanks, Michaela. Great to be here.
So tell us more than my brief overview you just did. What is this zero-emission vehicle program?
Sure. So the Zero Emissions Vehicle Program includes different rules for passenger vehicles, which are cars and light trucks, and medium and heavy-duty trucks. Now, the program for passenger vehicles has actually been in place for a couple decades, but a new rule was passed, like you said, that was going to go into effect for model year 2026, that was going to increase the percentage of new cars that had to be electric vehicles to 35%. And the program for heavy and medium-duty trucks was slated to start in 2026, with about 10% of those new trucks needing to be electric vehicles.
So how exactly do you get a car dealership to sell X percentage of EVs? How did that work?
So the rules target manufacturers. They require them to deliver a certain percentage of EVs among the cars and trucks they send to Vermont as a whole. There's no specific requirement per dealership and no requirement that the dealers sell those cars and trucks.
Oh, okay. So a dealership ostensibly could have a big supply of EVs sent to them that they've purchased, but they might not sell those to consumers. They could just be sitting on the lot.
That's right. So you can think of these as the rules that help guarantee supply of these electric cars and trucks. And at the same time, the state has been doing things to promote demand for them, like incentives and tax credits and building out that charging infrastructure that you were just talking about.
So this regulation was patterned after California's rule, right? Can you tell us about how they're similar or different?
Yeah, so California has special permission under federal law to set tailpipe emission standards that are stricter than those the federal government sets. And when it does so, other states can adopt those rules, and they have to adopt them exactly the same as California did.
And California is allowed to do that because they have pretty bad air quality, right?
That's right. It's a combination of the terrible smog in LA and the history they had of regulating air quality before the federal government started to do so. Now, Vermont's one of about a dozen states to have adopted the latest regulations from California. These are the Advanced Clean Cars 2 and Advanced Clean Trucks rules. And recently, Congress voted to repeal the approval that the EPA had given California for those rules.
Okay, so we mentioned California, and I think folks who might have been reading the headlines in big national newspapers might be aware that the U.S. Congress, just made a big ruling about California. Can you explain what's going on there?
Sure. So Governor Scott's order came between the votes by the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate on that removal of the authority that California had been granted to pass these rules. It's the first time that the California waiver has been revoked like that. And there were questions about the legality of the procedure by which Congress did so. California has threatened to sue. But the expectation is that President Trump is going to sign that into law.
And when Governor Scott here in Vermont signed his executive order on May 13th, halting Vermont's program for 19 months, he did cite some of these federal level issues and changes, right? Is what's going on with California part of the administration's reasoning for halting this program?
It's certainly part of it. And he also mentioned other federal actions, including President Trump's tariffs that are increasing the costs to manufacturers and consumers, and the cutting of funds to states to build public charging infrastructure, which are part of the Trump administration's overall change in course on electric vehicles.
Okay, so there's some federal level changes. There's also some state level concerns that Governor Scott cited. Let's talk for a moment about the charging network.
Sure.
I don't know if you do. I have an EV, so I've gotten well acquainted with the state's charging network, and it does involve a lot of extra planning to make sure that you can get somewhere, especially in the winter, with enough charge. It's different for sure in terms of planning than having a gas car, but there are more and more chargers coming every year, or at least there have been. Tell us what do you think is the status of Vermont's charging network?
Well, let's not take my opinion. Let's take the opinion of the Agency of Natural Resources as recently as February, when they published a fact sheet about the Clean Cars and Trucks rules that said Vermont's charging infrastructure was keeping pace with and actually outpacing EV adoption in the state. So it did seem like Vermont was doing pretty well when it came to having both at-home chargers, level 2 chargers, which people use to charge overnight, and these public chargers. Vermont did lose a large amount of money it was counting on to build public chargers at key points along the state's highways, which were going to make it more reliable to travel by EV around the state. And also the money that Vermont has been using to build out public chargers has dried up this year. Vermont has largely been relying on settlement money from Volkswagen, as well as federal funding that is now disappearing.
Okay, so a lot is changing right now. What are folks who pushed for this EV mandate back in 2022? What are they saying about this pause?
Yeah, so Democrats in the legislature and climate advocates who pushed for these rules were quite upset about the pause, especially on the passenger cars side. About a week before the executive order, top Democrats in the legislature actually sent Governor Scott a letter because they had heard that something like this was in the works. And, the letter said they understood that there might be some concerns about the technology for clean trucks as well as the tariffs, and that Governor Scott had discretion to pause enforcement of that for 1 year, but asked that he not do so for passenger cars. So after the order came out, Democrats in the legislature have questioned the justifications in the order as well as the timing.
And later in the show, we're going to hear from a Democrat in the legislature, a state senator, as well as the head of Vermont's Agency of Natural Resources, Julie Moore. Tell us a little bit more then, on the flip side, what the response of trade groups that represent the automotive and trucking industries has been.
Sure. So the trade group representing the automobile industry cheered the order when it came out. They have been advocating in states like Vermont that have adopted these rules to pause the rules or roll them back. I talked to a couple of Vermont car dealerships after the order. One general manager of a dealership said he hadn't really been following it that much, that he had been selling a lot of electric vehicles and expected to continue to do so. Another had testified to the legislature about these rules and was appreciative of the pause. He did not think that there should be these sort of supply mandates in place.
He didn't think there should be mandates in place. Was the thought that potentially the industry would shift by itself without government intervention?
He's a really interesting person. It's Mark Alderman of Alderman Chevrolet in Rutland. He's actually one of the top sellers of electric vehicles from General Motors in the country, he says. And so he's a big fan of the electric vehicles and has sold a lot of them in recent years, but felt that the mandates were counterproductive.
Let me read a couple emails that we've gotten from listeners here, because I'm curious for your thoughts, Nathaniel, having studied this story so closely. We got one email from Barb in Danville, who says that they bought an EV in February based more on the tariff situation than Governor Phil Scott's decisions around this mandate. Barb writes, EVs aren't for everyone, especially where the technology is today. Driving is a different mindset. Driving an EV does incentivize not going at an excessive speed because of power drain. And Barb hopes the advantages encourage the advantages of EVs encourage the market, but wants to see more charging stations. So that charging situation does seem to be a concern for Vermonters.
Certainly. I think that, and you can speak to this better than me. I drive a beat-up Prius, but it does seem like for folks, especially who don't have at-home overnight charging and who take longer trips, there needs to be public chargers available at key points on their journey.
We also got an email from Gregory in Derby, who says that electric cars are not the panacea for the control of greenhouse gas emissions. Gregory believes that conservation and restoring Earth's ecological services are the answer. In terms of cars, he writes, drive slower and drive a smaller car. We are a one-car family driving a car that achieves over 45 miles per gallon. So what I'm getting from Gregory's statement here is that, these EV emissions can do something to curb the state's emissions, but in the grand scheme of things, it might not be the most effective way to reduce emissions. Do you think that folks in Vermont's legislature who supported this mandate might disagree?
I think they would. And the folks who helped write the state's climate action plan, they identified the clean cars and trucks rules as a top priority and large impact action that the state could take to reduce transportation emissions, which are, along with heating, one of the largest sources of emissions in the state.
And Nathaniel, as you were reporting out this story for Inside Climate News about the situation in Vermont, I wonder if there's anything that really surprised you about it. I mean, you have your head on these environmental issues day in and day out. What's unique about Vermont's story right now?
Maybe the most surprising moment in the whole reporting was during the legislative hearing that Senate Democrats held with Secretary Moore a couple of days after the order came out. They asked her about this point about Vermont not having enough chargers and whether this was based on any data. And Secretary Moore said that this came from the governor's own experience driving around the state in his Ford F-150 Lightning, and not always
an EV.
An EV, famously an EV, first governor in the country to use an EV for work travel, and not always being able to find a place to charge.
Nathaniel Eisen is a freelance journalist. You can find his reporting on Vermont's zero emissions vehicle program on the site Inside Climate News. Nathaniel, thanks so much for joining us and for reporting on all of these important stories coming out of Vermont.
Absolutely, Michaela. Great to be here.
Coming up, a member of the Scott administration on why the program's been paused. And we want to hear your opinions on EVs and the mandates around them, too. Does this EV mandate or its pause by Governor Scott affect your decision to buy an electric car in the future? Give us a call at 800-639-2211. We'll take those calls in just a moment on Vermont Edition. Stay with us.
Thanks for listening to Vermont Edition, where support comes from Vital, Vermont information technology leaders. Did you know that 98.9% of Vermonters share health data with their providers through the nonprofit Vital to support better care? Learn more at vitl.net/sharing.
Welcome back to Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. Today on the show, we are discussing Vermont's electric vehicle sales mandate. Its goal was to end gas-powered car sales by 2035 and curb the state's emissions. In mid-May of this year, Governor Phil Scott issued an executive order putting that mandate on hold until the end of next year. You can join our conversation this hour. Perhaps you're concerned about this delay's effect on climate change, or maybe you think it's a good idea. Give us a call at 800-639-2211 or send an email to vermontedition@vermontpublic.org. Joining us now is the Secretary of Vermont's Agency of Natural Resources, Julie Moore. Her office was in charge of enforcing this EV sales mandate. Julie Moore was named to her position by Governor Scott in January of 2017. Secretary Moore, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, we're so glad you could fit this in. Now, in Governor Scott's executive order, he said that his administration is still committed to transitioning the state to all electric vehicles. What would you say to our listeners right now who might be doubting that commitment based on the fact that this will ultimately slow down EV sales?
Well, our hope is it won't slow down EV sales, in part because the underlying rules that Nathaniel spoke to remain in place, meaning so does the expectation that manufacturers will deliver sufficient vehicles to meet EV demand to Vermont dealers. What the executive order really speaks to is the use by my agency of its enforcement discretion should consumer interests not materialize, that manufacturers and dealerships won't be held accountable for the penalties.
So what are some other ways that the Scott administration is showing its long-term commitment to the EV transition?
Sure. So, over the past several years, during this period of unprecedented federal funding, much of the money that's come to Vermont has come with some degree of discretion, allowing us to make choices about how to invest those dollars. And significant dollars have been invested in helping build out charging infrastructure along Vermont's highways and byways, as well as providing incentives to Vermont consumers to support their purchase of electric vehicles. That said, those federal dollars are winding down at this point, and so it is becoming more challenging to continue to fund that work at pace. The governor had made a proposal to the legislature this year to take a pot of money that came from the proceeds from the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative and use that to either continue to provide EV incentives or support additional charging infrastructure, but the legislature opted not to take up that proposal.
And Vermont currently has 400 public charging stations, according to the state's Climate Action Office. That makes it a leader nationally in stations per capita. But we're still hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, that isn't enough.
Yeah, and I think some of it is the distribution of those stations, and some of it is the type of stations that are available. So whereas a listener along the I-89 corridor between Montpelier and Burlington may be able to find readily available charging infrastructure to support their needs, once you get off of some of those main thoroughfares and out into the Vermont landscape, it can be much harder to find charging infrastructure, or at least level 2 or high-speed charging infrastructure. And a lot of what exists out there are drip chargers that could take a day or two or even more to provide a full charge. And so we do have a significant number of charging stations that are out there in the public space. But depending on where you live, where you're attempting to travel to, and how far is in between, it can be rather challenging. And as I think you indicated, and one of your listeners did, you really do have to plan your travel accordingly.
Mm. Let's take some calls here as we speak with ANR Secretary Julie Moore. We have Chris calling in from Richmond. Chris, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Yes. Hi, Michaela. Thanks for taking my call. I am in Richmond, as you mentioned, and we just leased our second electric vehicle starting in March, and we've been really impressed by how the EV technology has improved in a relatively short amount of time. We drove to New Jersey and back last week, and we had no problem finding places to charge on the way. Richmond now has a DC fast charger. Burlington has them, as does Montpelier. So I think things are changing very rapidly with this regards, and we're never going back. We're an electric car family now, for sure. I also want to say that I work with standards for EVs and EV chargers, both in Vermont and California. And I want to stress the importance of the clean car regulations that the governor is pausing here. It's reasonable to tweak those regulations as they're implemented, given the impacts on the markets and the shifts as we go forward. And it sounds like that's what the governor is doing. But the timing is terrible, given what's happening in Washington, where Congress has basically tried to gut the entire structure that's been in place for quite a long time and yielded really significant benefits. Thank you for taking my comments.
Chris, thank you for that call. Secretary Moore, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts, particularly on Chris's the second part of his call, criticizing the governor's decision.
Yeah, I mean, it is a challenging set of circumstance right now that we are all working to navigate. Certainly the action taken at the federal level by Congress over the advice of their own parliamentarian is particularly frustrating, taking away a tool that has been in our toolbox for a considerable amount of time. But even without that regulatory uncertainty, the tariffs have created uncertainty. Costs are changing rapidly, and frankly, we are moving in a manner that's very consistent with other states in this region, including New York and Massachusetts, that have taken action very similar to what Governor Scott did through his executive order.
Chris, thanks for calling in. We also got an email from Dave in Mount Holly, who tells us that he bought an EV truck about 3 years ago. It costs about $600 to register, $65 for an annual inspection, and new federal laws will add another $250 annual fee. Dave says that he's retired and drives about 200 miles a month, and it has become nearly untenable to own this vehicle. Vermont needs to base fees on mileage driven, not weight, and they also need to abolish inspections. That's a topic of a recent Brave Little State episode. Dave, you should go listen. And Dave also writes, I will likely sell this truck and go back to polluting the environment and save a lot of money in the process. Secretary Moore, Dave has some real concerns here about the cost of owning an EV, even after you have it in your possession. Are you aware of any efforts that the state has planned to help address these types of concerns?
Yeah, that work is actively underway through our colleagues at the Agency of Transportation and specifically the Department of Motor Vehicles. Obviously, we have to figure out a way to strike a balance. Gas taxes paid by folks driving internal combustion engine vehicles are an important source of revenue for the investments we need to make in our roads and bridges. It's important that EV drivers also contribute to that work since they are using that same highway and byway infrastructure. And coming up with a system that isn't a flat fee is work that's underway. But in the interim, Vermont is implementing a flat fee charge on electric vehicles, and understand, as your caller indicated, that similar actions being considered at the federal level.
And lastly, Secretary Moore, I was watching part of a Senate transportation hearing in mid-May that got a bit contentious. It was about this EV mandate and Governor Scott's executive order. And in that hearing, Senate Democrats said that Vermont needs to hold the line against industry demands, is how it was put, I believe. What's your counter argument there to Senate Democrats and others, perhaps environmental activists too, who see this executive order as simply a curb or a concession to the automotive industry?
Yeah, I guess I would push back against that characterization because the underlying rules remain in place. We certainly want any Vermonter who wishes to purchase an EV to have that opportunity, to have there be vehicles on the lot. But one of the real concerns we've heard from dealers was about a practice called ratioing, where manufacturers were indicating they would only provide internal combustion engine vehicles proportional to the number of EVs sold, and dealers expressing real concern that their customers might not have the same choice around internal combustion engine vehicles that people would have in other places in the country if that's the vehicle that meets their current driving needs and current budget. And so it's trying to find that balance point, appreciating the need for climate action and continuing to push folks to make those choices and move towards beneficial electrification. We also were really concerned that this could have a pretty significant and adverse impact on Vermont consumers.
But to be clear, the ratioing that you just described, there hasn't been evidence of that happening in Vermont yet. It's a concern about it happening in the future.
Correct. And in part because these rules take effect for model year 26, right. So we're not there yet. But that was something that had been raised as a real concern by dealers and, frankly, a practice several manufacturers indicated they were likely to engage in.
Mm. Julie Moore is the secretary of the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources. Thank you so much for your time today, Secretary Moore.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Now, as you just heard, Governor Scott's administration has its reasons for pausing Vermont's EV sales mandate, but many Democratic state legislators disagree with those reasons, including State Senator Ann Watson, representing the Washington District. She's the chair of the Senate Committee on Natural Resources and Energy. Senator Watson, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
So first, I'm curious just to hear your thoughts on what Secretary Moore just said. I know you've heard this reasoning before. What's it like hearing it again?
Yeah, thanks. I am certainly disappointed by the governor's decision to delay the enforcement of these rules. I think they have been really key in ensuring that electric vehicles have been available to Vermonters on the lot when they want them. And I'm really afraid that the actions of the governor are going to make it harder for Vermonters to access the EVs that they want. We're seeing that. Only about 3% of the vehicles in Vermont are EVs, but they represent about 12% of the sales. Of new sales. We're seeing people very interested. Particularly if they're available in all-wheel drive models. Some of these dealerships are actually exceeding the requirements that they have right now, and so. It didn't make sense to me that we would be pulling back at this point, especially as, we really need to be leaning into this. I think if we're really serious about affordability in Vermont, we need to be pushing more towards electric vehicles. The data that we have about them, I know we had a caller or an email earlier about the costs, but the data as it bears out for Vermonters is that on average, Vermonters would save about $600 a year, or sometimes between $6,000 or $10,000 over the lifetime of a vehicle, because it is so much cheaper to own and operate these vehicles. We also we see that because it's effectively like having a $1.75 cost per gallon of gas, right? Like we would love to see $1.75 for a gallon of gas, but that's not where we're at right now and not likely to see that anytime in the future. But that is on average what's available for EV drivers. But
this pause in the mandate comes just as folks in Congress have moved to eliminate tax credits that have made EVs more affordable. There's also so much uncertainty swirling around right now with the tariffs on imported vehicles. Is this the time for a sales mandate around cars?
I think this is the time that we need more certainty and to be really moving towards more affordability, which is what these EVs represent. I hear the concern about the tariffs, but what we are seeing is that other states had some similar concerns, but were not delaying to the degree that Vermont, that Governor Scott has opted to delay, moving into model year 27 even, which actually puts us, lagging and not leading on this issue, unfortunately.
Let's take some calls here. We have Allison in Danville on the line. Allison, go ahead.
Oh, yes. Hi there. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. So hi to both of you, and thank you. I just want to let you know, I live in Danville in the Northeast Kingdom, and we just have a really different situation with the infrastructure. And I can drive into a parking lot there, and there's a ton of work trucks. And so when you start to think about our trades and our carpenters and our welders and our plumbers, they're all going to be hit by this too, because they need the range. They need to carry the weight. So this is also going to be affecting people economically. I've never had a car older than 2009. I don't have a car payment. There's a lot of people in the Northeast Kingdom and throughout the state who don't have a car payment. They want to fix their old cars, and I can't, where I live, drive a Chevy Bolt up a 2,000 elevation mountain with mud roads. So there's also the issue of reality of what's going to work in areas in Vermont like Burlington and Montpelier compared to the rural parts of the state. And that's a real problem.
Allison, thank you so much for that call. Senator Ann Watson, thoughts?
Yes, thank you. And also, hi, Allison. Thinking about the kinds of vehicles that Vermonters want, especially in terms of all-wheel drive vehicles, in terms of light-duty trucks, all of these are available in EV form. And so, I hear the concern about the availability of charging stations, and certainly, there's always space to grow and do better. But the reality is that 80% of Vermonters charge at home, and that is, increasingly available to folks. So, I think we could have some better deployment, especially up in the Northeast Kingdom. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. But that's something that, as we heard earlier in the hour, we're actually doing really well at per capita in the country.
Well, thank you, Allison, for calling in, sharing your concerns from a different geographical area than what we were hearing from with our callers earlier in this hour. Let's take one more call here. We have Fred in Barrie. Fred, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I've been in the transportation industry for my whole life, and electric vehicles intrigue me. My first electric vehicle was when I was 6 years old, and I'm now 68.
6 years old?
Yes. My dad was very inventive. But anyway, one of the things about America, and, right now, the governor can take a pause, I think, because we really need to teach people to transition to electric vehicles, and I think a plug-in hybrid would be a better thing, because the American society with an automobile is based on being able to go, go, go. And with a fully EV, if you don't plan your trip, you could be, I know two people have been left out with those T-brand cars that they didn't plan their trip correctly and they got stuck on the side of the road. But if you have a hybrid, you don't have to be concerned as much with how you may develop your trip, because if you don't have a charging station, you can get around. You can still get around.
Right. Well, Fred, thank you for calling in. Well, lifelong EV user. And as you note, it takes a different outlook to drive an EV compared to a gas-powered car. And we're in the midst of that societal and economic transition. We've been speaking with State Senator Ann Watson, who's the chair of Vermont's Senate Committee on Natural Resources and Energy. Senator Watson, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much.
We have to take a short break, but when we come back, we are going to hear more about how the trucking and auto industry is reacting to this pause on the EV sales mandate. This is Vermont Edition. Stay with us. Welcome back to Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. This hour, we are discussing Governor Phil Scott's decision to pump the brakes on Vermont's electric vehicles sales goals. He recently suspended a rule that would have pushed car dealers to sell more EVs. By 2035, the sale of new gas-powered cars in Vermont would essentially be banned. He said the state needs to be realistic, however, about a pace that is achievable. We are joined now by Brent Dragon. He's a representative of R.R. Charlebois. It's a heavy truck dealership in Milton, They specialize in Freightliner and Western Star trucks. Brent, thanks so much for coming here.
Yeah, thanks for having me in.
So I'm curious, you've been out there listening to this discussion so far. We've heard lots of different arguments for and against this mandate, but we haven't talked too much about your sector of this industry, heavy trucks. What have you been thinking listening to this conversation?
Exactly that. Everything that I've been listening to has been based more on cars and light duty trucks.
Yeah.
The heavy duty trucks are a completely different market. We are being forced by the manufacturer to sell an electric vehicle before we can order a diesel truck. And I know the state says that that's not the way the law is written, but that's what we're being told. And it's happened in New York. We have a dealership in New York, and I've not been able to order a truck since September 1st of last year.
Oh, wow. So is there any reason that your dealership might leave the state, go to New Hampshire, another place where these regulations are different?
No. We just got to look at doing probably some different things. Maybe buying used vehicles with older emissions and selling those trucks to be able to keep our sales guys employed, the shop busy. That's one of the avenues we'd have to look at.
Well, we just heard from a state senator. We got an email from another one. Senator Becca White wrote in to say that this decision by the Scott administration to roll back enforcement was because of intense lobbying by auto manufacturers, and that should concern Vermonters. Do you agree? And is that a concern?
I don't know if that. I really don't know if that's the case. Of course, as I say, we were involved just on the heavy truck side.
Yeah.
I don't know. I really haven't thought about that part of it.
Yeah. So you're worried about what is happening on the ground, not necessarily why this decision
Correct.
was made. Okay. Well, let's bring in one more voice here. We've got a call from Matt Cotta with the Vermont Fuel Dealers Association. He's been waiting patiently on the line to comment. Matt, thanks for calling in. It's been a while since we've spoken.
Hi, Michaela. Yes, it's been a while. It's Matt Coda.
Excuse me. There you go.
It's the Vermont Vehicle and Auto Dealers Association. We're the ones that represent the car dealers and the truck dealers and the voice of Vermont's car dealers. And, one of the things that we haven't talked about in this conversation, and thank you for having it, is that there is, we can track these sales. If you go to meadowhillmedia.com, which is my website, you can see exactly where we are month to month on EV sales versus gas sales. And that's important because it's important to note that the rule, the mandate, was imposed by the Scott administration, and the Scott administration also put the pause on enforcement because they looked at the data. And the data clearly says, which anyone can access, says that we are only at 8% battery electric vehicles new car sales, 4% plug-in hybrid sales. Getting to 35% by the end of model year 2026 would take a miracle. And we don't have it. What we have is fewer incentives, fewer subsidies, fewer tax credits, a lacking charging infrastructure. Yet the government had these mandates imposed, which would have real effect for Charlebois, other truck dealers, or other car dealers that employ thousands of Vermonters. So it's not that they're opposed to selling electric vehicles or that we're not going to transition to more and more electric vehicles. It's the pace of the transition was dictated by a California rule that Vermont followed. So Governor Scott absolutely did the right thing for affordability, for our economy,
by ensuring that while we continue to progress to more electrified transportation, we don't do it at a pace that would cause real economic damage to the dairy farmers that need Brent's diesel trucks in order to get milk to market, to the loggers that bring the logs out of the forest, to any person that doesn't have access to a 20 by 10 space outside their house where they can put in a level 2 charging. So
Matt, I want to jump in here because I'd love to have Brett's thoughts on what you're saying. That's Matt Cota with the Vermont Fuel Dealers Association. Brett, what do you think here, and what are you saying?
I agree 100% with what Matt is saying. The infrastructure for the truck chargers take 3-phase power, and we're finding a lot of customers don't have the availability to have 3-phase power. And the cost of to put a system in to run one of these trucks, I mean, you're looking at $150,000 to $175,000 per unit.
Wow. Do you think that your industry would transition towards electric power eventually on its own without government pressure?
I think, yeah, as Matt said, we're not looking to not go electric. At our dealership alone, we're putting in 3 chargers right now to be ready for this when the time comes. But right now, we're just not ready in the state of Vermont for it. As you know, a beverage delivery truck from Burlington couldn't go to Newport and back in the same day right now.
Why not?
There's no place for the guy to charge up in the Northeast Kingdom.
Like our caller in
like
Danville
the caller had said. And it's a completely different charging system than the cars. So there's a lot of infrastructure that's got to be done. And there's on a heavy truck, you only get so many hours in a day that a driver's allowed to drive that truck. He would be stuck up there for another day because he'd run out of hours of time to drive. And that's just delivering your beverage, your beer, or your sodas, or your breads.
And I think that's something that folks, at least I wasn't until I started researching for this show, I wasn't aware of, that the charging infrastructure is entirely different for the types of vehicles that you're dealing with, Brent, compared to, say, the car that somebody's using to drive their family around.
Correct. Yeah, it's completely different. If you had to look at if you took a 3-phase charge cable to plug into a truck, it'd be as big around as your arm. So, and a person, a female or a small guy going to charge his truck wouldn't be able to plug into his truck. The cable's going to be so heavy. So these cables are actually made. They're actually the size of a normal EV charger, which are water cooled around the outside of them. So it's a completely whole different system than what the cars are.
Let's take a couple more calls here. We have Andrea who's calling in from Burlington. Andrea, go ahead.
Hi. Thank you so much for this conversation. I love that there's a conversation about greenhouse gas emission reduction. I wish that there was more of a conversation and an involvement with the transportation, state transportation, as well as natural resources, because what we're talking about in all of these callers has been an infrastructure issue. And I really wish that the state of Vermont would be investing in the infrastructure of transportation and not just exclusively e-vehicles. It's not exclusively e-vehicles, but I know today's conversation is on that. But there is the sense that the e-vehicle is going to sort of solve the greenhouse gas emissions, but in more individual cars on the road is not going to solve the problem. There's still this infrastructure problem. There's still the wear and tear on the roads. And this is really needs to be a level of mass public transportation investment and a more diversified solution to this problem. So thank you so much for having this call. I wish that the transportation people were part of this conversation too, because the other piece of this that I haven't heard spoken about today is the huge environmental costs and impacts of the batteries and the production and disposal of e-vehicles. So while they may be reducing greenhouse gases. In the short term, they have other negative impacts. I just would like to see a more comprehensive approach to the state's view of transportation and greenhouse gas emission reduction.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. I appreciate that call and some good ideas for our future coverage as well. Let's go to Bo in Waterbury next. Bo, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Hey, how you doing? I've been in the construction industry for the last 21 years, and over the last 3 to 4 years, Vermont has put in or redone park and rides. And I own a small trucking company, and on the job, they weren't putting any charging stations in. So I asked the engineers where the charging station's going. And they said that it didn't call for any charging stations. So I asked them, well, are you going to put any future conduit in? Because, they're going to want to have charging stations. And they said that they weren't going to put any conduit in. And I worked around UVM for 15 years doing excavation. And it's the same thing that happens around there. You pave the ground, and then they cut it up 2 weeks later. That pretty asphalt has holes and cut marks everywhere. Oof. But it's just I think if you're going to put all this money into stuff, and it's not just you can't, if you donate $100 million to feed people and half the food goes to waste or spoils, you got to think about, it's the engineers that are taking care of all these jobs. It's not just it's not just the governor's fault. It's the engineers. Those are the people that are running the show. So,
Bo, I hate to cut you off, but I have to jump in because we just have a minute or two left. But I appreciate that perspective, especially since you're running a trucking company yourself and are trying to voice some concerns about the future of these charging stations and the need to plan ahead. Brent Dragon with our Charles Boys, the dealership in Milton. As we look to the future, what kinds of supports do you need, either from customers or from the state or from legislators, to help support your dealership as we move into this EV future?
I listened earlier, and you were talking about the cars had quite a bit of financial help to get them up and running. With the trucks, I think that might be a piece of it that we could use. A track,
like a rebate to buy an
incentive,
EV heavy-duty truck.
A new tractor, a new EV tractor is close to $400,000, whereas a diesel engine tractor is $160,000. So it's very hard for that guy to justify that extra money, plus the charging system that he needs to put in for his own place.
Wow. How much is a charging system?
$150,000 to $175,000 installed.
Whew.
Yeah.
All right, so some big changes needed, and also perhaps some big investments, just in a different way than what we've been seeing from the state so far.
For sure.
Well, Brent, thank you so much for sharing your perspective. It's a unique one when we don't get to hear enough. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me in.
Well, that is all the time that we have for today. We saw lots of calls and emails from you all, so this is certainly a topic we'll return to in the future, especially as things change at both the state and the federal level when it comes to electric vehicles. As always, you can continue to weigh in on our show, pitch us your own ideas or perspectives by emailing vermontedition@vermontpublic.org. Our show today was directed by Aaliyah Papes. John Ahrens is our managing producer. Andrea Lorian and Daniela Fierro are our producers, and our call screener today was Rick Barrett. Our theme music is by Myra Flynn. I'm Michaela Lafrac. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch up again soon.